to working with the families teaching session. Just a brief reminder again to use this presentation for learning purposes only and not to copy it. When answering your questions, obviously give examples of practice and your experiences, and if there's any theories or legislations or theoretical approaches, link it in where possible. So first question is, how can having a child in residential childcare, how can that impact a family's life? So it can impact it a lot, can't it? So having a child in residential childcare can significantly impact a family's life in various different ways, both in positive and negatives. The effects may vary depending on the specific circumstances, the reason for the placement, the duration of the child's stay. So let's have a look at some key points to consider. So having a child in residential childcare can have profound and emotional implications. So let's have a look at the emotional impact. So if we were to look at an emotional impact, the child may experience feelings of separation, loss, they may be struggling to adapt to their new home, which is actually very common. The parents on occasion can feel guilt, sadness, frustration, that's the biggest one I've noticed, about their child being in care. They could feel obviously sad that they weren't able to look after them. So look at it a little bit further on. Let's look at the family dynamics. So it can have an impact on the siblings. I think sometimes we forget about the siblings. We automatically think about the impact on the child and we think about the impact on the parents. But from my experiences, is when you have a child that has been placed in care or are on the brink of care, that's normally because they've been neglected or they've been abused. More often than not, if there is siblings involved, they have had the same sort of living environment. What happens is when a family or children, siblings, shall I say, are in this environment together, they support each other because they're the only ones that they've got is each other. So they end up supporting each other and their relationships actually become really strong and really bonded. So when a child comes into care, they have potentially lost the one thing that they've only ever known, and that's their brother or their sister. So it can have a really big effect on the child that's in the care system or the other children of where they were all together. So it can actually have a massive effect on the parental relationships. It can cause further stress and have a sort of a real emotional toll on the relationship between the parents. Imagine the conflict it could cause between husband and wife. So that could be another implication. And there is well, there can be some form of financial impact as well. So again, dependent on the different types of care arrangements, if your child is, if the child that you're caring for is on a Section 20 care order, so where the parents still have parental responsibility, and their child gets placed, I don't know, 4 hours away from where they live, social services won't really support or fund the family to be able to see their child. You know, it's a bit more of the parents are responsible to visit the child or arrange for the child to have contact and things, and they kind of have to fund it themselves. If a child is in care and then they're on a full care order on the 31, then social services will actually fund this to happen. They will actually pay for travel warrants for their parents to come up and see their children, or the home where the child resides, the social worker will actually fund for their child to go and visit the family. So some more impacts are obviously time commitments. So again, it could be having that visitation. Regular visits obviously is easy to do if the child is closer to home. Then if there were further visits, what about if they're not allowed visits? What about if a child has been placed in the care system and they're not allowed any contact with their family? So visitation could have actually a massive impact. When a child is placed into the care system, we have to remember that if they've been with their parents for a lot of years, this is all they've ever known. So social services swooped in. We've come to save them from the abuse or the neglect that they've suffered. They placed them into a home in the middle of nowhere with a random load of strangers and said, oh, by the way, you can't see mum or dad. That is one of the hardest things I could ever imagine. So we have to take into consideration that this will have a massive, I think probably the biggest impact on a child. So obviously you've got parental responsibility as well. It can have an impact on education and social life. So I'm going to pick this apart a little bit because, again, I think this is something we tend to forget about. These children are incredibly resilient. They are resilient already. Having said that, we've taken them away from potentially a life of abuse or trauma or neglect. But like I said, if they've been raised in that environment, that's all they've ever known. We've taken them away from their siblings, but also we've taken them out of their area of where they've lived and grown up in, and we've taken them away from their school and their friends. So it can have a massive impact on them again. On the flip side, the children could have actually missed a lot of education because of all the, well, maybe it's because of the neglect, or maybe it's because of the transitions, because sometimes children get placed in emergency foster placements and then they move to another area and then they perhaps don't get time to go to school. They may get moved to another area or another home, and so on and so forth. So they have it can have an impact educationally on a child. Also, as well, look at the family events as well. So sometimes if there is if there's been a massive birthday, or there's been a holiday or a funeral, heaven forbid, this can actually cause a lot of disruption in the child's life. And obviously, looking from the parent's perspective as well, it can be emotionally challenging for them, can't it? So, all of a sudden the parents are not able to perhaps work so much with the teachers and to support their child, because the local authority will take over this now. So when you look at this question, I really, really want you to pick it apart, because I think sometimes we need to look outside the box. We see the obvious, oh, it's going to have an impact on the child, oh, it's going to have an impact on the parents, but look at everything else. We're going to jump onto our next section now, and we're going to look a little bit further down the line of who else it can impact. So before we go into the next question, I want to have a look at, we've mentioned all those impacts. So how might these impacts change over time? That's the next question. So there's many, many different reasons. So my experiences, I've got an array of experiences around this, but one of the ones that always stuck out in my mind was when a child came in, the parents were very much of the mind that they hadn't done anything wrong. It wasn't nothing to do with them. It was social services. They came in and they just stole my child. I hadn't done anything wrong. They made all these accusations. It wasn't me. I wasn't neglecting them. I was doing what I could do in the circumstances. I never got offered any help. And it was kind of that very negative attitude. And one particular one that stands out is that was the situation with the mother. The mother was very defensive. Excuse me. The mother was very defensive, very angry, very bitter actually, but could not see any wrongdoing. She believed that she was completely not at fault, and it was everyone else around her. Over a period of time, we got the child settled into the home, we got the child settled into education. The child, after a few months, became a little bit more interactive, started going to some sort of like social clubs. I can't remember what it was they joined now, but they knew they were doing horse riding, and they were doing another activity that they really wanted to do. And they were engaged in education. After a few months, they weren't in full-time mainstream school, of course, because there'd been a few disturbances along the way, but they were attending their education. They were seemingly doing well. That kind of made the parent or the mother shift a little bit. And she started to recognise how well her child was doing. And over the period of time, she started to develop pride of the accomplishments that her child was doing. And then the parent started to work with us and was interacting with us and taking on advice about their relationships, and become very keen to then develop the relationship with the child again. And all of the anger, the frustration and the bitterness all started to disperse. Once that started to disperse, the child and the young person, the child and the parent started to build their relationship up. And it was quite a lovely thing to see, because what we have to tend to remember is, obviously it is different with every single child. I'm fully aware. But what we have to remember is that if they are a Section 20, we're striving to build that relationship back up with the parents so the child can return home. That might be the end goal. We might be looking at getting the child to go home. So we might have to build the relationship up with them. We may have to put some strategies in place to support the child, so putting some support systems in place. We might have to, obviously we will have to key work the child. We'll have to work with the child to get their wishes and feelings across. We might even have to seek some additional sort of professional involvement to be able to support the child returning. The parents might have to go on parenting classes. So therefore we're striving to complete all of these, as you can see on the screen. All of these we're striving to achieve, to even create this sort of reintegration plan for the child to return home. Sometimes it could be that the child's been placed in care because the mother was not well, or the father was not well. They had really significant health concerns. So it could not be anything to do with there'll be a neglect or abuse. It could be just the parents were sick, they were poorly. They could have had this nasty C word and there was no one to look after the child. So in that case, circumstances may change. So the parents might get better, the mother, the father who was ill might get better. Therefore, the child might be able to return home. Sometimes it could just be very simply, if the child's on a full care order, sometimes it can be simply just having that time away and to let everything settle. Because what I'm trying to get at is, evidently, is again dependent on the circumstances. Like I said before, is when the child does if they're staying in care, when their child does turn 16, 17, 18, and they're moving off into semi-independence, quite often or not, they will move back into the local authority of where they came from. So if they were from London originally and they've come up to Norfolk, the chances are once they reach that more adult age, they will move back to their local authority if it's safe to do so, obviously. So we need to ensure that these relationships are reasonable, that if the child does go back, they have got a reasonable relationship with their family. So over time, the impact is going to change. Things are going to settle down. We're going to get up a good line of communication with the families where possible. We're going to build those relationships up. The parents may start to be able to cope better. There could be drug abuse. There could be all sorts of things. But the parents could go through a program. They could be not drug dependent anymore. They may have gone down the road of getting, parenting classes. So there is a number of reasons. What I'm trying to get at is why the impacts might change over time. So it's really important to keep those in mind. Write down again, refrain from bullet pointing these. Give me some examples. The next question is the impact of intergenerational issues. Okay, so that's where I was leading from the first question. So we spoke about the impact of obviously a child and a child's life or a family's life when they come into care. So what is the impact on intergenerational issues that can exist in families where a child or young person has been placed in residential care? So intergenerational issues will look such like this. Communication breakdown between generations. So existing communication issues between different generations in families may be exacerbated. The lack of understanding, miscommunications, the reasons for placements can contribute to tension. If you've got a grandparent, you've got nan and granddad, and they've raised their children, and they've raised their children to the best of their ability, and their children have now had children, so they've become grandparents, and they've witnessed their own children lose custody of their children. It can cause a rippling effect. It really can. It can cause shame. It can cause upset. It can cause grandparents feeling disappointed in their children, themselves. It can cause conflict. It can cause massive conflict because, the grandparents may have been expected to take the children. Obviously, they might be disappointed in their children. Sometimes we have to take into consideration that the parents of the children that are in care could have been raised exactly the same as what they've been raising their children. The parents could have well been in care themselves. The parents could have needed to be placed in care, but they never were. So there could be a rippling level of history of trauma going through the families. So that could be an intergenerational issue. There's obviously there's going to be a lot of stigma and shame across the generations as well. So there is a number of factors. Here's some more of them. So you've got parenting styles. You have got barriers to reintegrate. I've just spoken about the repeating cycle, so obviously following that cycle of how they were raised. There could be cultural and generational gaps as well. Having those differences in cultures and values and beliefs between the generations could contribute to the challenges and the need of the child. Support and understanding. There could have been a lack of support from the generations above, and therefore that's had the impact on the parents, and which has resulted in the child being placed in care. think about it. You may well have an example of working with the generations. I can tell you now, I have worked with a lot of children in my time, and it's really common to have the child's parents have a history of being in care themselves, or being looked after by social services, or being under the watch of social services. There'll be quite commonly a history of perhaps abuse or trauma from the parents' perspective when they were children. So sometimes it ripples through the generations. But try and give your examples where possible. If not, answer the questions using some of these examples. So explain the principles of partnership working with families in your own work setting. So this answer is going to be relevant to your company, your job role, your home. But to pick it apart, this is what I'm going to be looking for. I'm going to be looking for collaborative decision making. Sorry, looking for supportive services, empowerment, feedback, and continuously improve, privacy, confidentiality, flexibility, cultural competency, transparency, respectful communication, and professional collaboration. So, loads of fancy words there. In a nutshell, I want to know what your ethos is with your home. For example, my ethos was very much that each of our children and young people had key workers. Those key workers were responsible to work closely with the parents. They would update the parents, let them know how their child was doing. If they'd had a good week at school, they would let them know. They would let them know on their boundaries, their rules, their what's going well for them, what's not going well for them. There was obviously, again, where applicable, sometimes there is no parents involved, but it was a responsibility to work as a partnership. On the flip side, giving the parents the strategies that is working well with the child or young person, i.e., maybe there is a behavioural strategy that you've figured out that you're using to support the child. Maybe the child, when they become heightened, you found a de-escalation technique that works very quickly to diffuse that situation. So you will share that information with the parents. So when they are on contact or when they are seeing their child, they can diffuse their child. It's really important to have this partnership approach because, like I said earlier, when the child may be on a Section 20, they may be going home, may be looking at going home. Or if they're not, if they're on a full care order, it could be, well, when they're 16, 18, they'll be going back to their local authority area. So it's important to get that involvement with the parents. This is going to be a really easy question for you to answer for the outreach workers, because obviously, evidently speaking, that's what you're doing. You're doing this partnership working with the parents. You're working with them to prevent the children coming into care. So give an example if you've got one. If not, tell me what's your ethos of your home? What do you endeavour to do to keep this relationship working between the families and the team and the home? So the next question is, describe how principles of partnership working with families meets the organisation's aims and objective. Again, you might be able to collaborate these two questions into one, which is really good practice, by the way. I like that. But by collaborating it, what I'm wanting you to talk about is, we do this, we offer this this approach to ensure that we are offering a holistic service. We're working together to have positive outcomes. We're using that inclusivity to be able to offer this child an overall approach coming from every angle. Why do you do it, basically? Why do you do what you do? And obviously it's going to be that holistic approach. Again, your main aim, everything that you do, your main aim is to attain these positive outcomes, whether that's reintegration back into the family, whether it's building independence with the young person whilst building a positive relationship up with their families. It might be a case of that there is no family connection, so they may not be able to go back to the parents. So you might be trying to build a relationship with auntie. So at least when they go off into their adult years, that they have got some form of connection with a family member. Another reason as well is that the children need to know their background. So it's really important to offer this holistic approach, because you will be able to find out information from their parents or from their family members about their background, about their culture, about where they've come from, about their lifestyles they've led. So it's really, really important to offer this and giving this sort of a holistic approach, because by doing so, you're going to offer some level of empowerment for the families, so they feel like they are still involved with their child lives, especially when it's a Section 20, which is mainly a parent's responsibility. And you're also going to make the child feel like, well, more empowered themselves, that they still want to have a relationship. These children still want a relationship with their families, with their parents, with their mothers, with their fathers. They want this. They will endeavour to always strive for this relationship. So it's really important. So the first question you're going to tell me your ethos, what you aim to achieve. And this question is why? Why are you aiming to achieve this? And how are you doing it? Holistic approach. And the reason being is we want positive outcomes, but obviously in a much more of a detailed answer. So I'd like you to describe to me some attitudes and approaches that will support positive relations with the families. So I've got a few examples up on screen. Realistically, I want you to highlight how you build a positive relationship up. I want you to be explaining to me how you build a positive relationship up with the home and the home and the families, and where you're supporting the relationship to build between the child and the families. So I gave you a few examples earlier. Effective communication with the families, letting them know, hey, I used to do it with one of mine. I used to. The mother wasn't particularly great at praise. So what I started to do was, when the child had a really good week at school, I would phone the mother. I'd get the information from the school. The child would be travelling back from school. I'd phone the mother and go, oh my goodness, blah, blah, blah. Has had an amazing week this week. I am so proud of her. She's done this, she's done that, she's done this. I'm so proud. She's so smart, and she's completed this course, and she's done this, or whatever it was. I would talk really enthusiastically, really positively, and show pride and stuff. So I'm almost demonstrating behaviours of how I want the mother to behave. Because then I'll say, she's going to give you a call. She's going to give you a call later, because she's really, really chuffed with what she's achieved. She's so excited to tell you. So I was kind of building that enthusiasm up with the mother, to try and almost educate her of how to respond when the child calls her. So that was an approach that I used to use. So when the child phoned, it was actually a monitored contact over the phone. So we used to listen over the phone and listen to the conversation. I would hear the mum going, oh my God, darling, I'm so proud of you. I can't believe you've achieved. And then she would mimic that enthusiasm with her daughter. So therefore her daughter would respond even more happy and more positively. And it's like, there you go. That was it. And that's what I used to do. And it got to a stage where I didn't need to do that anymore. The mother would just do it. So I knew that when that child returned back to the local authority, that relationship had been built. I used to build the relationships up with the parents just by being transparent, being open, being honest, keeping them in the loop where I could keep them in the loop, talking positively, giving them positive feedback. If a contact went well, I would praise the contact. Oh my God, they had a really great time with you. And oh, you didn't need to buy them their switch. They were so happy they showed me. And doing that, it's all about being positive. Again, where it's applicable. But I want to know what your attitude is and your approaches are for your home and what's relevant to you. Tell me about your positive approaches about building this connection. One of the biggest and hardest things that you have to do is, throughout all of this approach that you are offering, all of this building relationships, is if you've sat there and spent an hour reading the abuse that this child has suffered, or the neglect that this child has suffered at the hands of their mother, keep picking on the mums, or the father, it's very, very difficult to remain non-judgmental, because of when you start building a relationship up with a child or a young person, you become attached to them and you become protective of them. So knowing what you know, and you are having to share information with this person who's potentially abused their child or neglected their child, it's imperative, it's the most important thing that you need to do, and the most professional thing that you need to do when you are communicating. You do not show any feelings of remorse, any anger, non-judgmental. You do not demonstrate any levels of judgment when you're communicating with these parents. It's not your job. You are there to support the child. Your opinion does not matter at that point, sadly. All that matters is that you are there to do your job. You are a professional, and you will remain professional. Simple. And when the parents are kicking off and going, oh, doolally, you remain professional, because you are a professional. So, as you can tell, I'm quite passionate about that, but it is important that we do that. So why is it important to regard families as partners with expertise in the care of their child? So you can see there's a number of ones on the screen here, a number of answers. I'm going to go through a few of them, and then I'm going to give you an example, actually. So families will actually be able to contribute an insight to their cultural needs of the child. They will be able to highlight how the child has been brought up. By having this information, you can support the child more efficiently. You can adapt their care plan to be able to meet their cultural needs. It's really important to also recognise that the families or the parents have predominantly been with the child for a lot longer than you have, even though that the child's been placed into care or is at the brink of care. Evidently speaking, they've been with their parents since birth. So we need to keep in our minds that they do have some, quite a lot, some of them actually, to be fair, experience with their child. Their child hasn't learnt to walk on their own. They've been taught how to walk. The child hasn't learnt how to eat food on their own. They've been taught how to do that. They've been taught how to talk. They've been taught all these things because there has been some levels of interaction on a large majority of the cases. We need to also take into consideration that, I said earlier about if a parent has got ill health and that's the reason why the child's in care, they will know a damn sight more about that child than you will. They just can't look after them. It's really, really important to treat the parents, again, where applicable, where possible, but to treat the parents accordingly, because they do have a good understanding of their child. I worked with a young person, and their mother was a heroin addict. I don't know how long she was a heroin addict for, but she'd been a heroin addict for a few years. But when I worked with the mother, when she was on drugs, she was obviously incoherent. She was just on drugs. But when I spoke to her when she was obviously not high, the love that she had for her daughter was on another level. You could hear the love inside her voice. On one occasion, I remember doing a bit of feedback with mum, just letting mum know. And I said, oh, she's had a really good day. She's done really well at school today. She seemed a bit quiet when she got back, to be fair. And she had a drink and then she just went and chilled in her room. I popped in to check on her and she said she was fine. And I said, oh, but she was chewing at her nails. She was really biting her nails. And then the mum said to me, well, how badly? How badly is she biting her nails? I don't know. I didn't really particularly sort of like look at the level of it, but she was sitting on a bed with her knees up and she was really chewing at her nails. And the mum turned around and said to me, it's a boy, Erica. What do you mean? It's a boy. Okay, could you elaborate a little bit more? It's something that's gone on with the boy. Either she's got a boyfriend, or she's had a boyfriend who's been dumped, or there's something, any time you see her chew her nails, it's boy related. Oh, okay. So ended the phone call, went to see the young person, knocked on the bedroom door, asked if we could go in, popped her head in. Are you all right? And I knew she'd been talking to this particular lad. So I just was like, oh, how's blah, blah, blah. And that was it. She broke down into floods of tears and started telling me this whole story about what had happened. Listen, I would have never have figured that out. There's no way I would have been able to ascertain that information from having that child in my care for, I don't know, was it 8, 9 weeks? It wasn't long. So even though the mum was a drug addict, she knew her child. She knew that that was a sign that she was upset by a boy. So please be respectful and please treat them with a level of understanding. Again, where applicable. I'm always going to say where applicable, but they do have some understandings. They do recognise that, if they might need a certain blanket. They might need some form of comfort to help them settle. They might need their bed pointing away from the door, or whatever it is. They will have information to share with you to be able for you to offer the very best service to those kids, because that's what you're there to do. You're there to give them the very best of you. So getting as much information, again, this is this multi-agency approach, isn't it? Working with the mums, dads, grandparents, blah, blah. Getting this information is going to be able to make that child have the best possible outcomes, because you're going to be able to care for them the best. So it's really important to take into consideration that these parents do have a level of expertise. Again, like I said, it's not always the worst case scenario where these children have been placed in care. It could be illness, it could be a drug addict, it could be, a multitude of reasons. So where you are having that interactions with the parents, you take as much information as you can from them, because they will have information that you can certainly use to support that child. Anyway, I've put a few examples up on screen and a few reasons why we should do this. But, I've given you an example, and I think this example will give you a good insight to what I'm looking for how to answer this question. So the next question is, situations with families where it may be necessary to advocate for the rights of the child. So advocacy is about supporting a child to express their own needs and views and to make informed decisions on matters which influence their lives. Advocates do not make choices for children. Instead, they support children and young people to make their own choices. So situations with families where you might necessarily have to advocate. So you might need to advocate supporting them into their education, where there has been a report of abuse, to help the child maintain their relationship. So I'm going to give you an example for that in a second. To support their physical and emotional needs, to help keep the child safe, and to support the child in their decision making. I'll give you two examples actually. So, example number one, same young person. Yeah, same young person. Mum was a drug addict. The child was actually in a Section 20 order. It wasn't a full care order. But the child, I remember when the child arrived, she'd been through something else as well, but I'm not going to go into that. But she arrived to the home absolutely, as you can imagine, distraught, absolutely distraught. She'd been police had come into her house. She'd been found on the sofa fast asleep. She'd been taken, and she had been placed in a vehicle and taken to our home. So she'd been with us for a little while, and the social worker had put in place that there was a no contact order on, well, she was not allowed, she was not permitted, not no contact order, she was not permitted to have contact with her mother. This child had been with us for a few weeks. She was crying, she was broken. She was absolutely broken. She was crying for her mum. And at that point, I kind of looked through all the paperwork, me and my team did. We looked through the paperwork to sort of ascertain, what are the risks? Well, realistically, there was no real risks about having contact with mum. So at this point, as a team, we spoke to the social worker and said, why can't she speak to her mum? Well, no, seriously, this child's distraught. Can we not just at least have phone contact? So she needs to speak to her mum. She needs to speak to her mum. It's really important. So anyway, long story short, we advocated for the child. We spoke to the social worker. We got the social worker to override the no contact, and we put in place a phone contact twice a week for the child. Child changed around. I mean, obviously she's never going to be happy because she's been taken, placed in care, taken away from her mum, everything she's ever known. But the change, we were able to get her to engage with us then, because if we'd advocated for her, we'd heard her, and we'd shown that we'd heard her, and then we'd got her this contact with her mum. So this is a really good example of how you can advocate for the rights of the child. On the flip side as well, if you are advocating for the rights of the child in a safety measure, so you may well have outreach will be slightly different, but you're going to have a really good example, so you can use outreach. But if you are supporting a family contact and there is something that you deem is not safe, but the child has their right to see their family, but I don't know, let's give an example. Maybe the parents turned up absolutely bladdered, they're drunk, and they were being verbally abusive and verbally aggressive towards you and the child. So at this point, your priority is to keep the kids safe. You need to keep this child safe. So you're going to have to make that choice to keep them safe. And the child may want to be seeing their family or their parents, but they don't necessarily want to see their parents in that state. So you may have to advocate for them and break down the contact and sort of say, right, well, do you know what? Oh, let's rearrange it for another time. Because even though that the child does want to see their family, they don't want to see that. So you're going to have to step in. You're going to have to cut the contact in the nicest possible way, take the child home and give them a bit of support. It's their right to see their family, but it's also their right to be safe. So you're going to have to do that. So there's two examples there. Outreach, obviously, you're going to be doing this a lot. Every single time you're going to be advocating for the rights of the child. It's going to be one of your biggest jobs, especially when working with the parents. So obviously I've got some answers on screen here. When you're giving this out, give me an example if you've got one, or talk me through the importance of how you would, of why you do this and how you're going to do this. Oh, there's a few more on there as well. So explain the importance of having agreed roles and responsibilities for liaising with families. I've kind of touched base on this earlier, so I'm not going to go on about it too much, but in a nutshell, when you have clear boundaries set in place for communication or interaction between the home, the young people and the families, it will improve outcomes. It will demonstrate that consistent support. It will build the trust. It will reduce the conflicts. It will have a clear line of communication. How do you do that? How does your home do that? So think about it, liaising with families. Back in my day, key workers used to liaise with the families. Managers used to liaise with the families. We tried to refrain from everyone doing it, unless obviously it was an emergency. If the child had gone missing, then it didn't matter to anyone. But if they'd done well at school, PEP meetings, that key worker would always be in the PEP meetings, the LAC review meetings. They would feed back to the parents if the parents weren't involved. They were responsible to have the majority of the interaction with the parents, because that relationship would be built. It's a bit like John Bowlby's theory about a child needing that one primary caregiver. The parents also need that consistency as well to be able to build that relationship up. So having that clear line of communication with one member of staff predominantly, or even it might be two members of staff, just splitting it up a little bit, it gives the parents that opportunity to have good communication, to have that relationship built, to work more efficiently, to be able to support their child, because they build trust with them. You will build that positive relationship up with them. It will evidently support more positive outcomes. When you work with the children, you build that positive relationship up with the children. Once you've got that positive relationship up, we can get the children to engage. We can get them to communicate, tell us how they're feeling. It's the same with the parents. If you have that one particular person that's building that relationship up with the parents, again, we can get them to engage. We can get them to work with us. We can get them to, support their children. They can get them to communicate what they feel and trust us. They need to trust us as well. So it is really, really important. So again, ensure you don't bullet point these, but give some examples. That's it. It's a little bit longer than I expected, to be fair, but it's a very important unit, even though it's small. But we have reached the end. Hopefully you found it useful. And again, just refrain from bullet pointing, ensure that you're writing in sentences. But well done. Thank you for attending.